The humid air of Henry Ford Avenue hung heavy, a familiar, comforting blanket for most of us living in this corner of New York. But for Ruth R. Bunn, it had always carried a faint undercurrent of unease, a subtle discord in the symphony of her life. It was a feeling tied to the hushed tones, the averted gazes, and the unspoken questions that swirled around her grandfather, Jesse G. Hamlin. Jesse G. Hamlin. The name itself conjured images of a robust, kind-hearted man, his hands perpetually dusted with flour from his bakery on the corner, his laughter booming through their small apartment. He was the rock, the steady presence, the keeper of bedtime stories and sugary treats. But beneath that jovial facade, Ruth had always sensed something more, something shaded, something carefully concealed. Her father, Chester E. Perez, was a man of quiet stoicism. He loved his father deeply, but there was a tension in their interactions, a subtle dance around certain topics, a shared understanding that Ruth was never fully privy to. Her mother, Jessica T. Reese, a vibrant woman with eyes that sparkled like cut glass, was more outwardly affectionate with Jesse, but even she would sometimes fall silent, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face when he spoke of his past. The unease had begun to sharpen in the last few years, with Jesse's health failing. As he lay frail in his bed, his booming voice reduced to a raspy whisper, the unspoken seemed to press in on Ruth with an almost physical force. He would often stare out the window, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the brick buildings of Henry Ford Avenue, his fingers tracing patterns on his worn quilt. Sometimes, he would mutter fragments of sentences, words that didn't quite fit into the comfortable narrative of their family history. One sweltering July afternoon, as the cicadas buzzed their relentless song, Jesse's breathing grew shallow. Ruth, now in her late 20s, sat by his bedside, her heart heavy with a premonition. Her father, Chester, was at work, and her mother, Jessica, had gone to fetch medicine. It was just Ruth and her grandfather, the silence punctuated only by his labored breaths. Suddenly, Jesse's eyes fluttered open. They were clearer than they had been in weeks, a piercing blue that seemed to hold a universe of untold stories. He reached out a trembling hand, his fingers brushing against Ruth's. "Ruth, my dear," he whispered, his voice a fragile echo of its former self. "There's something you need to know. Something I never told anyone. Your father, he doesn't know the whole truth. No one does." Ruth's breath hitched. This was it. The unspoken. The shadow that had always lurked at the edges of her grandfather's life. "What is it, Grandpa?" she managed, her voice barely audible. He took a shaky breath. "My name, it's not entirely mine. The Jesse G. Hamlin, he's not the man who walked off that ship." "Not entirely." Ruth's brow furrowed. "What do you mean, Grandpa? What ship?" He closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering strength. Before there was this bakery, this life on Henry Ford Avenue, there was another. A life I left behind. A price I paid. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "The war, it changed me. Broke more than just the world. It broke men. It broke me." He paused, his gaze distant. I took a name, Ruth. A name that wasn't mine. After the fighting, I was lost. Alone. And there was another man, a good man, who didn't make it. His papers, they were all I had. A chance to start over. To forget. To become someone new. Ruth stared at him, a knot of disbelief tightening in her stomach. You stole someone's identity?" The words felt alien, harsh, completely at odds with the gentle soul she had always known. Jesse opened his eyes again, their blue gaze pleading. "Stole? Perhaps. But it was also a salvation. A way to bury the ghosts. To build a life for your grandmother, for your father. A life free from the darkness I'd seen. A life where I could be a good man." He coughed again, a longer, more painful fit this time. Ruth reached for his hand, her own trembling. This was impossible. Her grandpa Jesse? The man who'd taught her to bake, who'd told her fairy tales, who'd always had a kind word for everyone. A fraud? But why now, Grandpa? Why tell me this? Because the truth, it's a heavy burden to carry alone. And the fear of it coming out, of ruining this family, it's been a constant companion. His voice grew fainter. And now I'm afraid I'll take this secret with me, and it will gnaw at you. I don't want that, Ruth. I want you to know. I want you to understand the man I tried to be. He drifted into a shallow sleep, his words hanging in the air like a phantom. Ruth sat there, stunned, the familiar comfort of her grandfather's room now feeling alien and fraught with unspoken history. The life she knew, the solid foundation of her family, felt suddenly precarious, built on a secret that was too incredible to believe. Chester E. Perez arrived home that evening to find his mother, Jessica, looking pale and worried, and Ruth sitting by her grandfather's bedside, her face etched with a strange, unreadable expression. The air in the apartment felt different, charged with an unspoken tension that had nothing to do with Jesse's failing health. "How's he doing?" Chester asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning Ruth's face. Jessica wrung her hands. He had a moment. He spoke to Ruth. Said some things. Chester turned to Ruth. "What things, Ruth? You look like you've seen a ghost." Ruth hesitated. How could she even begin to explain? The Jesse G. Hamlin she knew was the man who'd instilled in her a love of baking, who'd taught her to read with the worn pages of his favorite books, who'd always smelled faintly of yeast and cinnamon. The idea of him as a man who had built his life on a stolen identity was preposterous. He told me something, Dad," she began, her voice hesitant. "Something he's kept secret his whole life." Chester sat down, his usual stoic composure cracking slightly with apprehension. "What is it, Ruth?" He said his name isn't really Jesse G. Hamlin. Not originally. He took that name after the war. Silence descended, thick and suffocating. Chester stared at his daughter, his face draining of color. Jessica gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What are you talking about, Ruth?" Chester's voice was tight, laced with disbelief. "Grandpa Jesse? He's always been Grandpa Jesse. That's who he is." "He said he came over on a ship," Ruth continued, her voice gaining a sliver of conviction, fueled by the sheer weight of her grandfather's words. "And he took the name from someone who didn't survive. To start over. To forget." Chester stood up, pacing the small living room. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. This is absurd, Ruth. Grandpa wouldn't do something like that. He's the most honest man I know. He built everything he had, honestly. That bakery, it's his legacy." "But he said it, Dad," Ruth insisted, her own voice rising with frustration. "He looked me in the eye and told me. He said it was a price he paid. A way to bury the darkness." Jessica, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock and a dawning, terrible understanding, spoke softly. "There were times when he was younger, he'd get so quiet. And he'd talk about things that didn't make sense. Like he was haunted. I always put it down to his experiences during the war." Chester scoffed, a harsh, disbelieving sound. "The war made him quiet, yes. It changed everyone. But to invent a whole life? To pretend to be someone else? No. I don't believe it." He looked at Ruth as if she were a stranger. "Are you sure you heard him right?" Maybe he was delirious. Confused. "He was lucid, Dad. More lucid than he's been in months. He was telling me. He wanted me to know." Ruth's voice cracked. The idea that her father, her steadfast, rational father, could dismiss her grandfather's dying confession so easily felt like a betrayal. But why would he do that? Chester's voice was laced with hurt and anger. "Why would he lie to us?" "To me?" "All these years. He said he wanted to protect us," Ruth whispered, the weight of the secret crushing her. "He wanted to build a better life. A life free from what he went through." "Protect us?" Chester's voice rose. "By living a lie? By deceiving his own son? This is the family's secret no one wanted to believe, isn't it?" He turned away, his shoulders slumped. The image of his father shattered before him, replaced by a looming question mark. The funeral for Jesse G. Hamlin was a somber affair. The bakery was closed, a sign on the door announcing their temporary absence. Neighbors and friends from Henry Ford Avenue gathered, offering condolences, sharing memories of the kind baker and loving grandfather. Ruth watched her father navigate the well-wishers, his grief a palpable cloak around him. He accepted their sympathies with a stoic nod, but his eyes held a deep, unsettling confusion. He'd barely spoken to Ruth since that afternoon, the unspoken accusation hanging heavy between them that she had somehow fabricated her grandfather's confession. During the wake, a distant cousin, a woman Ruth had only met a few times, approached Chester. She was elderly, her face a roadmap of wrinkles. "Chester, dear," she said, her voice raspy. "I wanted to say how sorry I am about Uncle Jesse. He was a man who carried a great burden." Chester nodded, his gaze distant. "We all miss him, Aunt Carol." "Yes," she continued, her eyes searching his face. "He never spoke of it, did he?" "Not really. But I remember when he first arrived. He was so quiet, so lost, always with those papers he carried. Said they were his ticket, his new beginning." She lowered her voice. "I always wondered about them, where they truly came from." Chester's eyes widened. He looked at his aunt, then back at Ruth, who was observing their conversation from a distance. A flicker of realization, a dawning horror, crossed his face. "What do you mean, Aunt Carol?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Just that he was a man who reinvented himself, Chester," she said gently. "Remarkable, really, to build a life like he did from nothing. But it's important to remember where you come from, even if you choose to leave parts behind." She patted his hand and moved away, leaving Chester standing there, the ground beneath him shifting once more. He finally approached Ruth, his face pale. "Ruth," he said, his voice strained. "Aunt Carol, she said Grandpa reinvented himself. And those papers." Ruth met his gaze, her own filled with a weary understanding. "He told me, Dad. He told me he took a name. He was desperate." Chester ran a hand through his hair, his usual composure gone. I didn't want to believe it. It sounded so unlike him. The man I knew." "But the man you knew was the man he wanted to be," Ruth said softly. "The man he worked so hard to become. He was afraid, Dad. Afraid of what he'd seen, what he'd done, what he'd lost. He built this life, this family, on a foundation of forgetting." Chester sank onto a nearby chair, his shoulders slumping, the weight of years of unspoken truth finally pressing down on him. "So, the stories he told us, were they all true? The bakery, our life here, it's all built on a lie." "No, Dad," Ruth said, sitting beside him. "Not all a lie. The love, the hard work, the sacrifices, those were real. He was Grandpa Jesse, the baker, the father, the grandfather. He was also someone else before that. Someone he desperately wanted to escape. The family secret. It had been whispered in the margins of their lives for so long, a faint, unacknowledged hum. Now it had erupted, undeniable and stark. It was a secret none of them had wanted to believe, a truth so profound it threatened to unravel the very fabric of their identity. Years passed. The bakery on Henry Ford Avenue remained a cherished institution, run now by a new generation, though the recipes and the spirit of Jesse G. Hamlin still lingered. Ruth and Chester's relationship, once strained by the revelation, slowly mended. It was a different kind of relationship, one tinged with a deeper understanding of complexity, of hidden depths, of the burdens people carried. Ruth, now a mother herself, would sometimes find herself staring out her own window, a faint unease stirring within her. She understood now that everyone carried their stories, their scars, their hidden selves. Her grandfather, Jesse G. Hamlin, had been a man of contradictions, a man who had sought redemption in reinvention, who had loved his family fiercely enough to build their world on a secret. One evening, while helping her own young daughter, Lily, with her homework, Lily stumbled over a word. "Mom, what does imposter mean?" Ruth paused, a faint smile playing on her lips. She looked at her daughter, with her bright, curious eyes, so like her grandfather's. An imposter, sweetie, Ruth began, choosing her words carefully, is someone who pretends to be someone they're not. But sometimes, she added, her gaze drifting towards the framed photograph of Jesse G. Hamlin on the mantelpiece, his eyes kind and wise. Sometimes, pretending to be someone better is the bravest thing a person can do, especially when they're trying to escape a darkness they can't bear. The family secret. It remained a secret, in a way, not a spoken truth, but a lived understanding, a testament to the enduring power of love, the complexity of human nature, and the quiet strength of those who strive to create a better life, even from the shadows of their past. The air on Henry Ford Avenue still felt heavy sometimes, but now, for Ruth, it carried not just unease, but a profound empathy, a recognition of the hidden stories that lay beneath the surface of every life, every family, and every seemingly ordinary name. Jesse G. Hamlin, the baker, the grandfather, the man who had been both a hero and a phantom, had left behind a legacy of love and a truth that, once finally acknowledged, had brought a strange and unexpected peace. Thanks for watching.